Hey guys, I decided to jazz up the beginning of these tutorials. Okay, so this tutorial is really about running through the steps that'll be required for exercise 3, site scaping. I reviewed this in the last session. I talked about it a little bit, so really here this is to illustrate and run through the specific steps that are listed there. Again, the primary pieces of software that you'll be using for this is Rhinoceros, of course, also 123D Make to create the various patterns and construction types, and I'll go through that. And then you'll also be using exporting from 123D Make and then using the workflow that you should already be familiar with in terms of laser cutting and setting up the files in AutoCAD. So I'll run through those steps that are listed on the exercise. This is the file, and this is uploaded on our OneDrive. So if I go to exercise 3, support files, you're going to see site student. That's this file right here that I'm showing you. The other files that you should be aware of as well, let me just jump back to that. I'll go to 243 workshop file and YouTube tutorials. That's where I have the links for those YouTube videos. But also you see here there's the 123D Make installation file. Now this particular version of this software is being discontinued, and so that's being replaced by a program that's called Slicer. So there's a few bugs with Slicer, and so I have the installation file here, so you can install 123D Make instead of Slicer on your computers for your use. I don't believe you're going to be able to do this much past March, and so after that I think they may disable the executables for installation. So that's why I have this here available for you for installation. Now if you're on a Mac, I think you may have to use the Slicer piece of software, and so make sure that you are aware of that. I don't have that available here, but definitely you could do a search. It's called Slicer for Fusion 360. I just find it here. Here it is, Slicer for Fusion 360. And so you could find that for Macintosh. If you can't find, I don't believe you can find the 123D Make Mac version anymore, but you should be able to find this one. So optimally, of course, you'd be working with Windows. If you do run boot camp, it'd be preferable to use this piece of software. Okay, so when you open up the file, this is what you're going to see. And so our site, let me just go to a top view here for the project. And those of you who are not in, so that's the studio project for 254. Those of you who are not in that studio, again, if you have a site that has some topography and you're going to be working with it that way, you can use that context and study models for the intervention there. But if it doesn't make sense and there's not much topography on your site for your studio project, then you could just work through this and just use it as a means to explore different concept diagram models and so forth. So the site is actually right to the south of Art and Architecture North and the north of Art and Architecture South, and it's really on this axis, so this walkway that's in between the shop and the south building, then eventually the north building. That walkway is really the center axis for the site, and so the site here is highlighted in red. This orange line right there is marking the central axis, and one of the requirements for the project is to bridge the gap between this pedestrian walkway and of course this pedestrian walkway that runs down the major sort of axis, one of the major axes of campus. Excuse me. Okay, so that's part of it, and then what you'll see on the file are, first of all, I included the overall image. This is the part of the PDFs. You have these available to you for Studio or what have you, so you can use these for analyses and so forth. But I went ahead and brought that in, inserted it into Rhino, so it's placed here to scale, the best I could get it. You know, there's a little bit of variation, but it's pretty close to full one-to-one scale. Now again, when you're drawing using a CAD program, you want to make sure you're drawing one-to-one. You don't want to draw to scale. So let's see, look at the layers. As intervention mask, that doesn't have anything on it yet, just that line. That's where the intervention will be. You can create your own layer if you don't like that one for whatever reason. I'm going to go ahead and make that one current. There's the site contours, which are the blue lines you can see there. I can zoom in a little bit better. So those are the actual topographic contours in 3D space, and so they've been reached up, and these are derivative of the contours that are actually on the plan here. Adjacent site topography, that's the site, the areas around our site, again, which is in red. And so just for some context to realize we're situated on that hill, you need to be able to satisfy the criteria for transitioning from whatever happens on your site to this topography. So the area in red is the only area that you're able to intervene and manipulate. This will have to be left as is. But I did want to provide you just with a little bit of context there so you can see how that works. It's a little bit abbreviated. You could continue this if you wanted to, because there is a pretty significant elevation change between the two, but I think for the purposes of this, this is fine. Project 3 site topography, so that's the red, that's there. The site JPEG, you can see is there. Tags, that's just the text down below that marks. You can see here the different elevations that marks that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock these two layers. I don't want to be able to select the image here, the site plan. I only really want to work with this. And actually I'm going to also, for now, turn off the adjacent site topography. And at times I might even turn this off because it gets a little bit distracting when I'm beginning to work with it. So the goal here is to work through the interface of Rhino, preliminary construction of surfaces and polysurfaces, eventually a solid, and also using some of the tools, particularly the Boolean tools here. So I'll go through that. The version, the example that I have on the brief itself is this. And so you see here again, this is the site base. Now it's been manipulated. See, I started carving that mass out a bit using not only this form that I created, so this is sort of the Freeform Intervention, again, very abstract, very gestural, but very much relative to some possibilities for architecture. So I use that. You can kind of see how it sits into, let me just turn that off quick. See how it sits right into this side area. So I carved out the site relative to this intervention. And so I use that as a device to do that. It's a little bit easier. Again, I have the ghosted display on in Rhino. This was for part of the program requirements for the Montessori incubator. It includes some exterior space, and so this is some exterior space. The other thing that's important about this, if I just turn this back on, oops, I scaled this down, so this is the small scale model, so this is really super tiny. I would actually, when I do it, I'll probably save this as a different file so it's just not confusing, but when I zoom out, this is the actual scale that we're looking at. And there's a couple versions of that. Here's the first version just with the Boolean split with that, and then you can see I carved out a little bit more, so there's a couple versions here. But if we look at the site, the idea with the program is that it's somehow, this is an incubator, but it's really going to be administered by education, so College of Education here. So the proximity and their new renovations, the idea is that they will be using this as an incubator for that particular kind of learning, which I think is K3 through 5 as it's listed in the program that you'll see in the 254 document. So in any case, what that goes to say is that somehow this is related to that. People from here will be using this, and somehow I wanted to, there should be a relationship. And so this gesture is sort of maneuvering from the axis that's above. Go to the top view. There's a little one. So the axis that's above here. So it's trying to mediate or transition from this upper elevation to the lower elevation, but also gesture towards the education building that's here. So something that indicates that. So in any case, I'll run through the steps that in terms of how I created this on this other file. There we go. Okay, so even right now, I don't think I need the topo lines on. I have those in 3D space. You can see them in the cyan. But I'm going to go ahead and turn those off. I don't think I really need those. And just, I'm going to lock other layers that I'm not going to be using. Really, I'm only going to be using this first layer, the orange one, intervention mass, and the site topo. Okay, so how I created that is I actually went into a different view here. So you can go into front. So the front view is actually, if I look at this, or maybe a top view is better. So the front is going to be this view in this direction, and then there's, of course, there's left, there's right, and then this would be the back. So here, the front view, I get the basically the section or the elevation view looking north. So that's what I started to use to create a curve. So I'm on the right layer, and so I use this curve command here to create kind of a spline, and I just really free drafted right over this. I'm not really concerned with it intersecting or the object snap of this at all, so I'm actually going to disable that above, and I'm just going to kind of free draft. I want to make sure I'm engaging the site. That's one of the requirements. I don't want to create too many points here, because the more points that you create, the more unwieldy the overall curve can become. So if you're truly trying to control this and want to use the control points, again here, I'll hit F10 to turn on my control points. I know that they are in here. I know it's hard to tell, but and then I will just make some adjustments there. Okay, that seems reasonable. I'm going to go ahead and create another, and in this case I will line this up above for now, and this will be, so this is the lower sort of edge of the surface that engages the site. This one is going to sort of ride above a little bit, but still connect to this overall shape here. And now that I have those two, I could tweak this. Maybe I want to move it up a little bit. Maybe I want to rotate them, just using the 2D rotate in this case. Pick about the center and maybe just rotate it a little bit. Maybe instead of this going all the way down, this becomes maybe a roof condition down there. Maybe you kind of come into the broadside there. Maybe I don't really like that geometry yet, so I'll again, the control point, let's see, it's in there. There it is. It's hard to see because this other, the site is on, so if that's the case, you can always just temporarily turn that off. You can see the control point. I could drag a window to select it, or I could just select it by clicking it, and then I could continue to play around with it a little bit. So that's riding above. Maybe the next one is doing something a little bit different. I sort of want these all to connect here. Again, it's really up to you. This is just what I'm doing. You may have a very different idea in terms of how this gesture may work, but at least this is something to consider. So maybe I'll have it come down, and then maybe I'll have it come down pretty severely here, and maybe it'll go up pretty severely, down again, and then maybe it connects up. So we'll see how that turns out. That's kind of funky. All right, so again, I have the X right now lined up with this axis, and so whatever I drew, it automatically went to that construction plane, which would be X equals 0, 0, yes, or Y equals 0 rather. So put it right on that plane. So, okay, here I have these three shapes, or these curves right now, and maybe, you know, right now this is sort of distracting to me, so I'm just going to turn that off. I can also turn off the annotation there. Okay, so now I'm just working with this. Let's say this, I want it to be in the middle or something, and perhaps this is, let's use that further up. Maybe this will be the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and go in my top view. I'm going to just move that, so I use the move command. And I don't have my ortho on as a default right now. If I hit F8, it will. Or you could hold your shift key down to do that. And now that I have ortho toggled on down here, also you can toggle it down here. I can hold my shift key so I can go to any angle. But I can move it up, and maybe I want to go ahead and move this up, let's say 20 feet. So I'll just type in 20 feet. And that puts it to that edge over there, and I have to enter that because I still have to note the direction, so I'll click to enter that. So that's 20 feet up. So that's decent. Again, I'm just kind of free sculpting here a little bit. This one, I think I'll move that up. So I'll go back to my top view, and I'm going to move it, move command up, and let's move that 10 feet. And now, let's see, I will take, go back to this. So I also need something at the top here, and I could continue to kind of work with this. Now if I go to my left view, I'll see this straight on, and I could start to, you know, continue to work with it. Meaning I could rotate it, so I'll just use the 2D rotate. I'll use that midpoint as the center, that's fine. Asking for the reference angle. Now if right now I have ortho on, so it's only going to go into 90-degree increments, but I can hold my shift key down and get to a slightly different angle. Maybe this one, because again I'm thinking about a relationship to the education building in this case. So maybe I'll actually select that same one again, control points, and I'll select that, go into my top view, so I got that control point, and perhaps I'll just bring it over a little bit more. Maybe I'll do the same for these two. So I'll select them both, turn on the control points, I'll grab those, and just kind of bring those over. If I wanted this to be a little bit smoother, oops, let's see, a little bit better that way. I can grab these and massage that, so you can see even with the few control points that I have, there's starts to be some funky kinks in this. So you want to make sure you're not getting too crazy with the control points. Okay. I realize that orange is kind of hard to see now. Alright, so I have that. The other thing that I want to be able to create is I'm going to take this, I believe, and copy it underside this, and I'm going to take this down to control points. So I'm just creating the framework for something. Basically I want it to be able to create a top and a bottom. that curve. I'll go into my front view. Let's see here, I want this to be below that where the curve's there, so I'll grab those points and make sure it's below. Alright. This one looks like it could use some adjustment as well. We go back to the front view. So I want this to be in there. This is just relative to the geometry that I created. Yours might be a little bit different, so I'll kind of soften that a little bit. I'm just hitting escape to get rid of the control points. Okay, so right now I'm just going to go ahead and loft these. Before I do that, I want to make sure that these are lined up. So I'm going to select this one and turn on its control points. And grab that control point and line it up with the end of this other. It's still a little twisted on itself. This will be a problem for creating a solid later on, so I'm going to go in and tweak that. Front view, so if I really zoom in, I can see it. It's just too close there. So I can go back, adjust this, make sure it misses that. Maybe this is too much of a bump here. I'll dial that down a little bit. Okay. So again, there's a variety of ways you could create the surfaces here. I could connect these with a line or a rail. That's not entirely necessary. So I'm going to execute two loft commands. One is going to be for the bottom, the other one's going to be for the top. So this is the bottom profile, this is the top profile. So I'll just go into surface loft, or you can type in loft, and I'll select 1, 2, 3, enter. And okay, I'm good with that. And then I'll select the top, which is 1. It's asking me for the edge of the surface or the curve. I'll go ahead and select the curve. That window will pop up whenever it can't really decipher what you're wanting to select. The same thing will happen here, so the curve or the edge. In this case, either would work, but I'll go ahead and select that, enter, and say OK. So now I got this funky form, and I can go back to my contour and see how it's interacting there. Obviously, there are some issues here that will occur as part of this intervention is below this grade, right? So I'm going to, part of one of the requirements is to use non-primitives. That's what I would consider this to be that we just created. So before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and select both of the new surfaces I just created, and hold my shift key down to select both of them. Make sure I have the surfaces. And I'm just going to type in join, or of course you could use the puzzle icon there. So now that's considered to be a solid. Because I use the same curve on the edges here, I know that there are, that's a closed seam. So basically this overall geometry now is watertight. Okay, so say I am satisfied with that. Now I have to excavate some more area here, right? Because I want this to be the intervention. I don't want there to be ground on top of it. And that's what will happen right now. So I'll go into the top view. And let's see, in this case, maybe what I'll do, and this is where I would allow for some primitives. So once you have this and you've created a non-primitive, then for further excavating, I think it's okay for you to use non-primitives, or primitives rather. So for keeping this a little bit brief, I'm just going to create a box. I'm going to turn my object snap off. And again, we want to think about the scale. There's a particular scale that the program requires. So you can keep that in mind. I'm going to free sculpt that right now, though. And basically what I'm looking for is I want to make sure that that's excavated out, and make sure that I don't have a situation where I have ground on top of my intervention. So I'm just going to drag a rectangle, and I'm going to bring it all the way out. And that's going to ask for a height. Obviously I can't implement the height. I could type in a distance if I wanted to, but I'm going to just do this through the views, so then I can just toggle in this height. I don't really care about the height. I just want to use this to carve out some of this topography. Okay, so for this right now, so now we're ready for the Boolean splitting. So I can take this right now, and whether or not I use that, I'm not quite sure yet. You know, I could as well take this overall intervention and just grab everything. Site, topo, and to fix some of the things that, I'm just going to deselect this, holding my control key down for the selection. You know, I'm just selecting objects. There's no command right now, so it's just entering those. So in order to kind of alleviate this as well, another way to deal with that is I could just, well, I could recreate the surface. So I could have, instead of lofting it the way I did, I could have maybe like taken this curve, copied it over, turn my object snap back on here to there. And so I could create another sort of top edge, so I can loft from here to this one in the middle to now this one that I know is above the topography, and then this would be a kind of a flatter edge, and that could open to the exterior. Maybe that's what I'll do actually for this. The other option that I was going to recommend, just in the interest of time, if I go to front view, I could just move this thing up, right? So I could just say, okay, this is a sketch model. I don't have to be super accurate, but I want to make sure I'm working accordingly with the topography and everything. So I could continue to move that up until I'm free of the earth there. So, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to quickly recreate this surface. So this is there before. I'm going to turn off that. This is a surface I created before. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. The other thing I want to make sure here is that this is the curve I just copied over, that it meets the end of this. So I'll turn on my control points. Again, F10, or you can use edit points here. And now it's right on the end. So now when I loft this, I'll do the bottom first, just like I did before. So I'll go into Surface, Loft, 1, 2, 3, boom. And then I'll do the top, same way, 1, curve, the middle curve, and now this other curve that I copied over, 1, 2, 3, boom. And now I want to close up this edge, right, because I have this funky edge that's closed up. I have curves there, but even if I didn't, if I just had the surfaces, I can use and select the surface edges to create a surface there. Surface edge curves, so I want that edge. It's still selecting the curve, which is fine, but you can see here, this is the actual edge of the surface selected. So I can select that, do the same down below, enter, right click, I'm just right clicking to enter, and now I've created that surface. So I know because of the way I created this that this is all nice and watertight. It's all separate, simple surfaces right now though, so I have to join them. So I'm just going to drag over all of this and just type in join. And so I'll have the polysurface. If I just move it quickly, see if it combined also these profiles, which is fine. You can always explode them again if you want to use them. Control Z to get that back. You could just grab and move things if you haven't noticed. So if you just wanted to move something quickly, and you could, I think, type in a particular distance as well for this, say 20 feet. in that direction. Boom, there it is. So the default is a move command, so I don't really even have to go into move. Sometimes you want to, just to be more precise though. Okay, so if I bring back my topo, there's that. See, I have a little bit of pooling there, and I think I'll just do something different for that. Here, I'm going to create a different surface on top, because I don't want this ground to be there. I'm also going to, I hid that object before, that rectangular volume. If I right click on the light bulb, it'll unhide. So I'm going to select that and just hit delete, get rid of it. Okay, so I like this, so I'm going to go with this. That's going to be the intervention. I still have to get rid of this part. So what I will do is, what will I do? Let's see, top. I'm going to copy this over, and I'm going to copy it over at a particular distance. I can see here what I'm getting close to down at the lower left. It's the 80 feet looks like it's good if you look down right there. So I'm going to type in 80 feet to remember that distance, park it there, say OK. Now what I can do is I can actually take this, I just want to use these edge curves, I'm just going to extrude those straight up, just so I can create a mass that I could take away from all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and, yeah, I think that should work. I'm going to take this, I'm going to explode the top of it. Delete that. So now I just have the sides, and I'm going to extrude this straight up. So this I'm just going to use to carve out the topography. This is actually going to be my intervention. That's 80 feet over. You may not run into this problem, but I'll just run through it anyway. Okay, so I want to go into, what do I want to do? I'll go into surface and extrude curve. I'm just going to say straight. So I'm going to select that. All these edge curves I'm selecting. Edge of surface. Now that those are joined, I'll have to select that. And I can right click to enter, and now I can just extrude this straight up. Right? So now I have that, and I can actually turn off the topo. And now I want to create a surface from the edge curves. 1, 2, 3, 4 edges. Boom. So now I have that extruded, and I could select all of this and join it. Now I can turn my topo back on, and I can for sure do some excavation now. So I'm going to go ahead and run through, so now this is a solid, that's a solid. I can run through the Boolean two objects. So you can go select union, difference, all of these, but Boolean two objects will run through different options. So select two objects to Boolean. Okay, 1, 2. And if I just left click, it's going to give me different options. So the intersection, subtracting out of the bottom of that one, subtracting out of the bottom of this one, that's actually the one I want. So I will right click to accept it, or you can just hit enter. Alright, so we have that. These curves, right now I don't really need these, so what I'm going to go ahead and do, I could create another layer and throw them on a layer or something. Actually, maybe I'll do that. I'm just going to throw them on the contours layer. So I have this selected, go to properties, and here's a layer, and I can just change it to set contours, and now they're on that layer and they're gone. This is a little residual line here. I'm just going to delete that. I used that to create the base. Alright, this is on the wrong layer. I want that to actually be on, sometimes when you Boolean, it's going to change the layer, but I'm going to put it back on the site topo, so it's red. And I'm going to bring this, the actual intervention back over. So I'll go in my top view, move, and I can type in my 80 feet, and then it's exactly where it needs to go, and I'll set the left click to enter that. Okay, that's looking better. Right now I have that pooling, the intervention. Who knows, maybe this is a roof, or you can occupy the top of that roof, and then you can kind of go over. So I'll explore that right now. I'm going to go into top. Instead of using a primitive, I think I'm going to just use some curves to create a quick surface. So I'll go select this curve. I'm going to disable my ortho. How should I do this? Okay, I'm actually going to keep that. Select the end. Maybe I want that curve to kind of, I want it to sort of have a exterior space right here, let's say. So select that, and then select that there. So right now this is in space a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command. First I'm going to get a curve from this edge. I want that curve. So I can use curve from objects, duplicate edge. Let me go into perspective view so you can see what I'm doing. Here's the one I just drew. This is the edge I want to duplicate, so I can just hit enter, and now that's going to be another curve. The reason why I did that is because I knew that the other one was that was there was already grouped. I'm going to hold my shift key down, select this. So I have both of those curves. I'm going to use that to sculpt this, but I don't want this profile. I actually want it to be flat. So what I'm going to do is go in my top view, and I'm going to use the command that's called project to construction plane. It's going to take these curves and push them to the construction plane. So they'll be at z equals 0. So we'll kind of flatten them out, but it's not going to distort them in the other direction. So I'll go transform, project to construction plane. It's asking me if I want to delete the input objects. In this case, I do. So now if I go into perspective, it doesn't look like anything changed here, but if I go into perspective view, those are now at the base. Then I could go into, let's say, solid, and I can extrude planar curve. Those would be planar curves. I could do this along a curve. I'm just going to do it straight in this case, so then I can get some height. And I just want to be able to bring this up to a reasonable height. Maybe now I'm going to go into the front view, and I want to move this up to a particular elevation. Maybe it's going to be on the second floor, let's say somewhere around here. So I'll select maybe 12 feet. So I'm going to move here, select in, type in 12 feet, see what that looks like. Yeah, I guess that could work. Or right click, or I'm sorry, left click to enter that. And you notice it's cutting through this area over here. I don't want to do that. I want to stop it before it hits this edge. So I'm actually going to what should I do? I'll trim it. So I'm going to draw a line right here, and you could again measure this, but I'm just going to draw a line. Say I want it to be a few feet away from that edge, and then I'm going to. I could just trim this. I could trim it or split it. I'm going to go ahead and trim it. So select the cutting objects. This line I want to use to cut. Right click to enter that. Objects to trim. The stuff I want to trim away. It's that. Alright, I can just hit enter to get out of that command. I don't need this line anymore, so I can delete it. Sometimes if you have those lines hanging out, they start to become a little confusing for doing other things. But as I mentioned, you know, the solids, that was a solid before, but now it's actually, it's like an open box, right? I have this open edge, and I need it to be a solid in order to execute the Boolean command. So I'm going to select it. I know because of the way I trim this that this is a flat slice. So there's a nice tool in solid that says, so it's planar, and here you can tell it to cap planar holes. So any hole that's planar in a solid, it'll just fill it in, right? So now it's filled in, it's a solid, and I can actually then move through the Boolean command. So maybe I'll take this and I'll turn it off for now. This is a little bit, I'll have a little bit of a slice here just because of the way that's hitting the ground, so I'm actually going to move it over a bit. This up, the polysurface up, move it. I'm just going to eyeball this against the sketch model. To about there, let's see how that looks like. So that'll give me some access into this area. It's a little bit of a sliver of an area here, but again, it's a sculpture concept model, so I'm really just sculpting. You know, if I wanted to, I could change the scale of this. Go to the top view. If I wanted this to be more broad, let's say that's the case, I can go into scale, one dimension, and I can just use this reference point, this, and make it bigger. It's doing that because it's selecting different points. I'm actually going to do that command again. Different points in space, so it's angular the way it was doing it. See, this will be much smoother. I can move that back over so there's a little bit more space, and yeah, maybe that's the way it works. Back to the perspective, and okay, maybe that's reasonable. Boolean two objects, 1, 2, and I'm left clicking through the options. That's the one I want, where I have multiple cuts here. This is still a little bit of a kind of a problem. Maybe I'll clean that up. Yeah, I will. I'm going to accept that though. And then quickly to kind of clean out this edge here, I'll create another box. I'll just start it there. Go to my top view. Oops, that surface was not box. Yeah, maybe this will work. Going to the top. And the height. So I know I'm right at that specific height there. And so this, the elevation, so the bottom of it's where I want. And I could sort of rotate this over if I want to make sure to have this to be a nice clean edge. So maybe I'll do that. I'll go ahead and select this, go into my top view, and I will do a 2D rotate. Shift key down. Okay, just getting that edge. And now I could go through the Boolean command again. Solid. Boolean two objects. 1, 2. Click through these options. And yeah, let's say that's good for now. I'm not super happy with the way it slammed into this back, but for the purpose of this exercise, maybe that's useful. You can imagine maybe stairs go up to this or come down from here above somehow, and then you can get over into this exterior space. I can bring back, I'm going to put this back on the layer it's supposed to be on, and turn on, right click on the light bulb and turn that back on. So now I can see this sitting into the site, and there's some exterior space that's adjacent to it. And you know, for a beginning sketch model, masking model, maybe that's something that I want to work with. Okay, so good, let's run with this. Okay, so here I would just go ahead, this is just a raw file, so I'm going to go ahead and do a save as, and just the right one, yep, and I'm going to give it today's date, today's 308, and I'm just going to say this is, I'm going to say full for full scale. Full scale, so I don't forget. Okay, so there's that. So now I have it one-to-one saved. Now what you need to do is scale this down to a model size. So I want to select everything here. I'm not really concerned about the other parts of this, because I'm just asking you to work with this base, the red, and the intervention itself. The adjacencies, if you want, you can model that, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So for the sake of this, I'm not going to include that in the scaling. So what I want to be able to do is scale this puppy down. So I'm going to go to 3D scale. I could type in 0, 0, 0 as my origin. So scale, factor, or reference point. I actually want to type in a factor. The model scale is an 1/8 inch scale, so that would be 8 times 12. So it would be 8 feet per inch. And we convert it all to inches, right? So it's 8 times 12, which would be 96. So 1 over 96 should give me an 1/8 inch scale. Now, see, it's super tiny right there. So if I go to my zoom selected command, I'll get right out there. So this is the little guy that you were kind of looking at when I first opened up my other example. Now I want to do, I want to save this as, maybe I'll type in 96 scale, meaning the 1/8 inch scale. So that's the scale factor. So I know that's the scaled model. Save. Alright, now I got to export some of this stuff. I'll start with the base, and I'm going to go into File and Export Selected. It's going to ask for different file name and so forth. What I want to be able to export this as is an STL file. Looks like there's a little typo on the brief. I'll have to fix that. It's just STL, stereolithography file. So if we go here, STL, and I can call it, give it the date, 170308, let's say, site base. That's fine. The date will tell me, okay, site base, good, good, good. I say okay, okay. So that was the base. Now the intervention, I'll do the same thing. I'm doing this separately because I want you to use different construction techniques for these. Export selected, stereolithography. I know that's the right date, so I'll just use that to begin, but I want to say intervention. Intervention. Save. Okay, okay. Now, you should keep this open because once you bring this into 123D Make, sometimes there are some scale issues. So you want to be able to go back here and measure, like the length is what I use to make sure it's at the appropriate scale. So I'll get out of this. I don't need that. No, I don't want to see that. Okay, so I'm going to open 123D Make, or if you have the file, let's see, it's the stereolithography, it's this one and this one. Start with the site base. I think I have it set to open with 123D Make. Yep, so I can just open it up with that. Or you could use this import. If you just saw it before, there's it said import here. If you hit import, then that'll you can navigate to where the file is. The problem I was having with the slicer program is it was bringing the models in like on their side, which was kind of funky. So didn't want to deal with doing that. Okay, so we just have the site base here. It's just the model, and it's a solid. It has to be a solid to bring it in here. And what I want to do is to select the manufacturing settings. Basically, this is the sheet good that you'll use. So there's some presets here, but you can also create others. You see here I have one for cardboard, one for chipboard. You hit the pencil, and you're able to create your own. So here the plus sign will let you add a material. So you can hit add material, unnamed. Then you have all the settings here: inches, the length, the width, the thickness of the material. Horizontal margin, I usually just leave these as the default. We're working small enough where this slot offset doesn't matter. That's to make sure that notches will work and they don't get bound up. Tooling diameter, I just kind of leave that. I'm going to delete this and go to the cardboard, because you can use cardboard for this. It's a little bit thicker, it's an 1/8 inch, so then that'll be one sheet for every foot. So then this is all set 18 by 32. Again, you can change this, but this is obviously set for the laser cutter. The thickness is at an 1/8 inch, and all of these are the defaults. So I want to make sure that that is what I have selected. So I'll come back here, scroll down, and make sure I have the cardboard selected. Now here's, you want to make sure this is at the right scale. It's telling me that the length, this is the longest dimension right here. This is can be a little bit inaccurate, but I know that the longest dimension is this dimension from here to here. It's saying that that is 8 inches. So this is where I can go back to my Rhino model and test that. So I'll type in distance, from point to point. And it says that it's 8¼ inches. So I'll go back to 123D Make, and I can change this. I want to make sure it's a uniform scale, but I can change this to 8.25. And the others then should update accordingly. Now it says that the next length, which would be this broad length, is 6¼ so I can go back to this model and re-execute the distance command, and 6¼ so that seems like that's at the right scale. So it doesn't quite come in at the 1:1 scale. I haven't found a good way to get around that. That's just a little bit of a bug, I think. Construction technique for the site-based model, I want you to select stacked slices. So automatically it'll figure out what it takes with this cardboard material to stack it up and to create this. And so that's the major step. Then you go down below, you can tweak other things here if you'd like. The slice direction, I don't want you to do that necessarily for this, but you can change the slice direction, modify the form. There's assembly steps that you can follow. So if I hit assembly steps, it shows you it as complete, but it'll walk you through how to start with part 1, part 2. And also you notice that these have blue lines, so that would be your perimeter cut. It also has this red line. That's so you can align the layer that goes on top of it accurately. So you know that the next layer, whatever goes on 5, needs to line up with that red layer right there. So you have 2 sets of lines. So make sure you're setting that in AutoCAD as an etch. Same with the numbers, right? So you know which piece is which. And so, you know, it's going to walk you through all these steps to stack it all together to create the base model. All right, so then you could then say get plans. So then it's going to give you this. You want a file type, export it as a DXF, which you can open up in AutoCAD. Then you can just select export. It's going to ask you to sign in. Let's see if I can remember my sign in quick here. I don't know if this will work. There we go. Let's see. Now we'll have to give it a name. So I'm in the right folder, again 170308, and I'm going to say site base, and it's going to be in a zip file because it's going to have a couple files here. So I want to make sure to extract it from that zip file. So I'll say save. Okay, so then that's the DXF. You can see that in your folder. So let's see. It's in this zip file. You're going to want to make sure to extract it before you try to do anything with it. So you have to extract it out. Then you can open this up in AutoCAD and then make sure all the layer properties are set accordingly. Get them into the laser cut template file and make your changes there. So that's the same workflow that you did for the last project. The other thing that I want you to do, so if I select this, I have modified, do you want to save it? So I could save this as well. It probably makes sense to go ahead and save it for you, so you can, private project name. Well, I guess you can fill this in, the project name, description, or what have you. It's private. I'm going to cancel that, and I can save a copy to my computer, and then I just get my normal dialog box. I can save it as today's date, 123D make file for the base, whatever you want to call it, and then you have it if you have to come back to make some changes. So I'm going to get out of this. Just for the sake of this, I'm not saving it, but you should save yours. And then I'm going to go into my intervention. There it is. Open with 123D make. looks like something funky happened at the end here. I think it got so thin. This is probably where the surface, this surface was just a little bit above this one, and they kind of intersected in a weird way. So then that's why it, I guess, came in that way. That's a little funky. I haven't seen that before. Hopefully yours won't have that. But I'm just going to roll with it. And let's see, I want to make sure the scale is right again. So here, again, the width, I'm assuming it's from here to there. It's saying it's 8 inches. So I'm going to go into Rhino, go into my front view. It's really tiny again, so I have to zoom the selected, and I could just almost want to take a line and draw it up here, and then get as close to this edge as possible as the overall width, and type in distance. You just start typing in once it highlights, you know, it recognizes that you want that command. You just select it. 9 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to type that in here. 9 1/4. 9.5. And the other should update. 5 inches. I'll assume 5 inches is from here to the bottom, and then this is like 4 inches. For the sake of this, I'm going to assume that everything went scaled proportionally. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to select the chipboard, and then I'm going to go down to select construction, construction technique, interlock slices. So now it's going to take this and automatically start to divide it up into these, and you can again walk through the assembly steps. But what I want you to do is tweak some of these settings though, because who knows, maybe you wanted less or more of these verticals or horizontals, and you can start to work with that. You can actually move some of these around. So I can just add more slices in one direction or the other. It works there. Maybe both directions, you add a few. It's going to potentially have some errors, especially with this one, because it's kind of working in and around itself, so it's probably having some difficulty with that area in particular. That's where this is showing up in red, and it says model issues, that it looks like it intersects itself. Global errors, unconnected pieces in blue. These are pieces that are just kind of not intersecting. So that's going to happen with this. I'm not too concerned with those little blue pieces like this one there. And these you might have to do a couple things to get them to work because of the way it's interlocking with these other layers. So, you know, play around with it. You can also change the direction. So if I go into slice direction, and this could start to get a little unwieldy, which is good for, I would recommend saving this so you can come back to the original. But you can change the scale. If I select that, I can change the, the angle of these slices. So if I want it to be at some different angle, and I can do that in different directions. Say I'm happy with that. And then I can go into the same, you know, there's the assembly steps. So I'll just have to drag it to the beginning, and then it's going to tell you which piece to start with. Start with part Y5. That'll be etched onto the part itself. And then intersect with Z1. So it's highlighting that. And so it's giving you the instructions to put this together. So that's part of what's nice about this tool, that it automates that for you. So you get all done. These little pieces obviously will just not be connected to anything, just leave those off. Back to get plan, so the same strategy, and it's basing it off of the chipboard I had set at 18 by 32. You want to, once you bring it into AutoCAD, change this to a portrait format, so just rotate it all so it's landscape, not portrait. And it's highlighting some of the pieces that you may have issues with, and so that's just part of fitting this together, and you may have to cut it up a little bit more depending on what the issue is. Okay, so if I go into, there are other options here as well. Folded planes, so you can imagine what's like, just like the skin of it, and you can add and remove seams here. So if I wanted to add a seam or remove a seam, I'm able to do that just by clicking. So the cut layout, you can see here, that's all this stuff flattened out. There's an issue there with one of these. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but perhaps it needs another seam that could correct it. So you can sort of keep on working. You don't want to make it too complex until that is an issue. You can also go to model issues and see what it says. Active panel with errors. Not sure exactly what that is talking about. So if something's funky is happening with that error, that's going to happen. This program isn't perfect. I think it's, still, to me, I would still consider this to be somewhat of a beta. But in any case, you can go back to the same strategy here in terms of getting plans. You can also change the joint type. Here, I don't like the diamond. There's like a geared option. I'll show you what those kind of look like closer up. Perforated, laced, so if you want to try to lace it together, it'll give you a pattern for lacing it together. Puzzle pieces. So there are a bunch of different options here for these seams. So that's just a clean seam. So you can kind of play around with this and it'll show up. Let's go to geared. Then if I go into get plans, I can zoom in on this and you can see here it's giving me these gears. Ideally the panel next to it will sort of interlock with it. Okay. And again, radial slices. So there are different options. So I want you to do one that's interlocking and another one that's using one of these other techniques here. Again, this is slices, and you can change the direction of these slices. You can also manipulate the object. Right now, this would use a lot of material. This will be, basically a solid piece of slices. So you could manipulate the object to kind of hollow it out. It gets a little funky trying to do that, but that is an option. Slice direction, assembly step, so same thing as the previous. So you get the idea. So once you go through that, you can make sure to so you can hollow it out, just giving me a little view inside. And so this is the width of things, so I can increase the hollowing. Just really drag it over, see what it does. See, there's a little bit of an opening there that wasn't there before. See, that starts to show up in the patterns. So then you see get plans. One of these now has this hole in it, so potentially you'd use less material, I guess. It's not really necessary for the scale model, but anyway, that's there. So you get plans, again, export as a DXF, export it there, and then it'll be a zip file, so you can call it the intervention, whatever you want to call it. And then you can bring those files, again, open those up into AutoCAD, and then kind of run through the layout properties and everything to make sure it's set up accordingly. You want to make sure, again, that if you zoom up right here, especially for the base model, and I guess this technique as well, that this, like the number and this edge right here, that it is, they're on the etching layer, and then the perimeter would then be the perimeter vector cut. So vector etching and vector perimeter, because this is going to give you an alignment guide for the piece that goes on top of it. Okay, this has been a long one. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a good spring break. All right, thanks guys. Till the next one, bye.